We are now recording. Neil, you can start when you'd like.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give it another minute or two. I see several folks are currently in the process of joining the GoToMeeting, but we'll get going here in the next minute or so. Good afternoon. Application webinar. This is the first of two webinars that we propose to hold during the fall call here to provide applicants with additional information as to how to fill out the applications for discretionary funding, as well as how to accurately develop cost estimates for your projects. So we have several of us that will be giving you background today on how to move through this process, but just to provide some introductions, our transportation planning engineer, he will be talking to us this afternoon about cost estimation for projects. We have Curtis Bridges. He will be giving us some feedback regarding the bicycle and pedestrian process. And then I'll be here just for support, and I'll be scoring some of the highway projects. And then Jennifer's really Jennifer Stafford's really the main point person for the discretionary funds call for projects. And she will walk us through some of the key elements of this presentation. But as you're filling out your applications, Jennifer's probably your first point of contact for general questions. Questions about shortfall and questions about the planning project. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer, you might be on mute.
Spend about 60 minutes going over the application information and highlights. I'm going to show you where to find the application on our website and resources. We'll have a short Q&A, and then we'll turn it over to Augustine for some estimating practices, and then do a longer Q&A at the end. So right now the fall call is open. Of course, today we're having the first webinar. The second one will be October 7th, and I'll send out an email reminder, again, with the link to the webinar. The application deadline is October 16th. It's about 5 weeks away. As soon as we start getting applications in, we'll start scoring them. We will take the recommendations to the TCC and the board in January, and then ask for action in February. So the way the process works is first staff will combine all the information. It'll go to our project oversight committee, and they are a subcommittee of the TCC, and they will recommend applications be approved there, and then we'll go to the board. So as of today, we have moved the location for discretionary projects. It used to be under resources, and now it is under plans and programs on our website. So hopefully that's an easy change for you all. But it's just CRTPO.org, plans and programs, and then discretionary projects. And then from there, it'll bring you to the fall call information. And I've highlighted just the main things I want to show you first, which is that we have about 8.1 million available in grant funds, or what we call discretionary funds. We also have $26.7 million of bonus allocation funds for roadway projects in Mecklenburg County. So as you're filling out your application, there is the opportunity to apply for bonus allocation funds only. And the reason I bring that up is because bonus allocations do not require a match. So if you're looking for all or none, there's a point on the application that will allow you to do that. The second middle box is where the application can be found. And then the third box that I've highlighted is the form that is the estimate that Augustine's going to go over today, but it is required. So that will be important to fill out and fill out correctly. The middle box here, just like last year, we're using Google Forms again, and you can save your information as you're working in the application, but as soon as you close your browser, you will lose your work. So that's the downfall of using Google Forms. We have created PDFs of the applications, which is right below. So the bike and ped is probably the most complex of the applications. And when I was on the other side and was filling out the bike and ped, I just printed out a copy or saved it to the computer, answered the questions there, and then when I was ready to fill in the application, I just opened that up and copied it. And then this second box or at the bottom is the link to the last webinar, and my email address is there as well. When you're on our website and you're at the application area, if you scroll down a little bit further, really it's the next item down. It's the discretionary funds policy document, and we just revised this. But this is your go-to manual. It will have the scoring criteria, the minimum amount to apply for. If you're applying for a shortfall, there's a new matrix in there that'll help you sort of decide if you're going to score well or not. So this is your go-to guide. And please feel free to ask me if you have any questions on that. Last year, Neil Curtis and Aaron Kinney did a very nice presentation on filling out the application, and they went page through page on the application. The recording was so good that, and it's still very relevant, so we just decided to have that recording available, and that again is on our website if you scroll down a little bit further on that same discretionary projects page. If you are applying for planning funds, the resource guide is sort of your secondary go-to document for that, and that is again under plans and program, and then there's a unified planning work program tab, and you can click on that. So let me just give you the quick highlight on planning funds. So planning funds are only used for planning studies. They are not used for engineering, any type of design. I think you can do a small percentage, but really when you're applying for these funds, keep in mind it's for planning. The projects will start July 1st, 2021, and they'll go for a year. So again, be mindful of the projects that you're submitting for and that you can do them in a year. One change that we will have this year is we will have agreements between CRTPO, actually the City of Charlotte, and the jurisdictions that are awarded the funds. And we haven't done that in the past, but it's just like capital projects when you're applying for a sidewalk project or a roadway project, and you have an agreement with NCDOT. So we work closely with the jurisdictions on the planning funds, and then the the city or CRTPO requests for reimbursement. So first the city will reimburse you, then we ask for that reimbursement. So it's a little bit different than the capital projects, but that agreement will be part of it. And you probably all know, but let me remind you that municipal agreements need to go in front of your board or council to be approved. So we will be in very close contact with you, and as soon as something is awarded, your project's awarded for planning funds especially, then we will let you know to get on the agenda for your board or council, and City of Charlotte will do the same as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, and he's just going to talk about the highlights, changes, and reminders of the application.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. So the application is broken into 3 parts. Those are new requests, existing CRTPO projects needing additional funds, and existing CRTPO local planning projects needing additional funds. The funding source is determined by CRTPO staff, ability to identify the funding source and the current match. If you are working on an existing project that has not received grant funds before, then the project is considered new. This year we will be awarding bonus allocation funds, also known as VA funds. Per state law, these funds can only be used in Mecklenburg County. They must be used for highway projects only. Priority will be given to projects within the I-485 Express Lanes corridor. That project runs from South Charlotte to Independence Boulevard. And again, CRTPO will determine the type of funding that will be awarded for those projects. The next slide. So there are several required documents which are required to support the application. And here you have a list of kind of a checklist for those attached documents. Those include Budget Form 1, and there you have a link to that budget form. That's a required document. A cost estimate prepared by a qualified professional, which is no more than 6 months old. That's also required. Preliminary plans or a concept plan, which would typically include a cover sheet, a plan map attachment or attachments, meaning a shapefile with metadata. That's required. A letter from your jurisdiction confirming a local match, their commitment to that local match, that's required. And then letters of support. Letters of support are optional, but you can include those. All these attachments should be emailed to Jennifer, to her email, which is jennifer.stafford@charlottenc.gov. And then under the others, other classification there, you can list any pertinent project documentation which you've submitted that relates to responses given in the application. It may include roadway safety audits, local crash reports, or local crash data. So with that, I think we will move into questions.
And before we go into the questions, I just wanted to kind of reinforce something that if we reach out to you all after you've submitted an application and we need additional information, we just ask that you quickly provide it. If we don't have all the information necessary to score the particular project, it may not be possible to consider your project from us after you've submitted your project. Please try to get us the information requesting as soon as possible.
So with that, sorry for the delay in audio. It's probably the worst experience I've had with GoToMeeting, so I apologize for that. Do we have any questions so far? You can use the chat box or just unmute yourself. There'll be more opportunity for questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep, now we can. Go ahead. Go ahead. Is it Laura?
Okay, I guess there's like maybe a delay when I speak. Yes, it's Laura. I just wanted to make sure you could hear me before I started talking. So I believe I'm not supposed to use my old application form to help me with the new.
On the estimating part?
Did that make sense?
Yeah, you faded out. Are you talking about the Form 1, the estimating spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yeah, let's, Augustine's going to go over filling out.
I'm not sure that.
Hi, Laura. This is Agustin Rodriguez. Are you asking the application, the own application, using the old application? I don't understand your question. Okay,
Yes, I guess I can wait till you finish your presentation.
Yeah, I think Augustine's going to cover that for you, because you had that question earlier, and it dawned on us that other people will probably have that question as well.
Okay, but I thought she was asking about the previous application form from Google. She was asking if she can use that application.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant. It was more of the contingency amount once we get there.
Yep.
Oh, okay, yes. I think at this point, before we jump into the Form 1 and estimating, the question is on the application itself. If anybody has questions or comments on the application process, or for the application process. Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer and Neil. So let me see, everybody can hear me, I hope, pretty well. If not, if for some reason you start having some delays on or lagging on communication, let me know, and I'll pass away or try to find a solution. To start, I want to go over inside of my cost estimating background and how this skill has both helped me professionally, but also allowed me or has given me the opportunity to help in the places that I work previously and currently. So I started in 2005 in blind development, and I work as a cost estimator. Did that for about 5 years, and then in 2012, I got hired by Colgan & Stone as a designer, where I worked for a couple of years, and then URS AECOM. And in both of these firms, consultant firms, I was able to help their offices in implementing best practices and training the other engineers, landscape architects, and planners in estimating. Same happened when I came to the city in 2016, where under Veronica Wallace leading the engineering group, or nowadays General Services, we completely restructured and created tools and resources for the engineering department and the city of Charlotte. But at the same time, for those who don't know me that well, I've been with the National Guard for now 14 years. And I also been able to bring that skill into the military all these years. Currently, or most recently, when I was activated in April for about 6 weeks in support to operations against or to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. And I was the lead professional leading all of the cost estimating efforts. So I just wanted to put that out there to let you know that this is something that goes beyond with light development. Very well, now let's jump into estimating. And I'm going to start off with 2 questions. The first of those, is there such thing as a good or bad cost estimate? And the next question, is there a perfect cost estimate? Well, the short answer for the first question is yes. And hopefully by the end of this presentation or webinar, we all going to agree on how to identify those good versus the bad cost estimate. And the answer for the second question lies somewhere in between that unicorn and that dragon. There is no such thing as a perfect cost estimate. Let me make that clear right away. Next thing I want to cover is some basic definitions, or the basic definition for cost estimate, because I think, believe it or not, there is misconception with something as simple as the definition. So the first of those definitions that I want to share with you is from the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE. And it says that dealing with uncertainty, cost estimate is dealing with uncertainty by developing an educated guess that substitutes for an actual measurement. Another good definition is from the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. And it says the summation of individual cost elements using established methods and valid data to estimate the future cost of a program, project, or operation based on what is known today. And I want to highlight a couple of key terms or words in here. The first one, educated guess. So regardless of how confident you are in your estimate, it's still a level of guess. It's not until you complete a project and you get in those invoices when you know the actual cost. So as long as you have uncertainty and unknown, there is some portion of guessing. Therefore, it is incorrect when somebody says, give me a cost estimate, I don't need a guess. It is still an educated guess. How we get there is the second key component that I want to show, which is the methods and the data that you have at your disposal. And last but not least, the knowns. And this takes me to my next point, which is what you know and you don't know on a project. For that, I want to, hopefully some of you or all of you have seen this graph before. It's known as the cone of uncertainty. And it's from somebody that we all should be very familiar. This is directly from the Federal Highway Administration. It is a pretty old graph. I think the first time I came across was when I was in college, so more than 10 years ago. And I'm going to be referring to this graph throughout going forward through this presentation. But one thing that I want to highlight is how the uncertainty with time changes. And it changes far faster than we all can think of. So really, according to this graph, that curve kind of sharps or kind of flats by the time you pass the 25% of a project. And really, when you look at this graph, when you are in the midpoint at 50%, your uncertainty, ideally, right, should be relatively close to between 1.5 to 0.8. So you should have good understanding of all of your unknowns and uncertainties. So I think, according to this graph, a sweet spot is somewhere in between 0.3 and 0.4 of your total time for a project. So I just wanted to keep that in the back of your head going forward. But that doesn't happen when I just talk about this uncertainty and how you flat that curve. It doesn't happen without putting some work. Before you get to that work, there are some principles and practices, best practices. And the first of those, particularly for something in estimating and our business that we do for planning and engineering, it needs to be documentation. You have to document assumptions. But that alone is not enough. The next step to that is to validate those assumptions. And I'm going over this because, believe it or not, based on the time that I've been with CRTPO, engineering, and again, with the consultants that I've worked previously, there is very little assumptions, there is very little documentation, yet very little validation. So a good rule of thumb is that you're validating those assumptions at least every 12 months, ideally every 6 months, or after every milestone, after you reach a milestone in your project. So 50% submittal, 75%, and so on. The next part is to challenge those assumptions to expose risks, limiting factors, and unknowns. So I have an example. A 1 mile sidewalk project assumes $0 for right-of-way cost. The assumption is that all of the right-of-way, all of the sidewalk is going to be built on public right-of-way. Well, that's great, but guess what? Have you considered the temporary construction easement? Maybe you have to get it. So again, in this example of this 1 mile project, just because of temporary construction easement, you might need to encroach or get easements from 25 different parcels. And hypothetically speaking, on this example, the cost, the admin cost, the administration cost of each parcel just to get the temporary construction easement could be $5,000 a piece. So you might think that TCE, the cost of those easements may be $200 per parcel times 25. That's really not much money, but you could be leaving off the table $125,000 for not challenging those assumptions. And this hypothetical example, we have, and we've seen this example happening less than a year ago. So again, documenting those assumptions, but also you take off and validate those. So as you improve your plans and you go from 25 to 50 and so on percent plan submittals, then you're not only checking for the cost of the unit cost, but you're also documenting and you are validating those quantities. So CAD, a spreadsheet, PDF, paper, however you do it, make sure that you're including dates, names, and general information for that documentation. Next, I want to go over the process and the method, because this is really what makes the whole the entire difference between a good and a bad cost estimate, which is methodology. And this may be a little bit for the longer discussion, but personally, I will say that CRTPO doesn't have a methodology for you and your jurisdiction. At best, CRTPO have guidelines. So what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of people, and I hear this from multiple people, have referred as, we are using CRTPO methodology for our cost estimates. Okay, so again, let me be clear. I don't think CRTPO has a methodology for you. So the fact that we have the 20% or 25% for this line item or this other line item is at best a guideline. A methodology is a process, and that is not a process. That is just a recommendation, again, a guideline. So going further with this, as long as your methodology, and again, to elaborate on what I said a moment ago, you have multiple phases. Those phases equals multiple layers, which means that you have multiple chances to be updating. And we all do this in every project. Your consultants, they're always updating the plans. So they make sure they're also updating those documents and those assumptions, and therefore the cost estimate. A good process, and this is something that also can be addressed in a much longer conversation, but I feel that in general, all of the jurisdictions in CRTPO, everybody has a good handle on the construction costs, but that's not enough to say that construction costs, a good construction cost is good enough, and that is the project cost. Therefore, our project cost, the total project cost is good because we are doing good construction costs. So the steps, and I'm going to go over it in more details after going through Form 1 on this construction costs and how to help the jurisdictions with this. Also, I want to make sure that people know that we need to stop the over-dependency of contingencies. What I mean by that is that in many instances, like an example that I showed for the 1 mile sidewalk, we rely on those contingencies to cover the things that we keep calling unknowns, something that we don't know. But you know, if you have a good practice and a good process, that you need to be accounting for that TCE in right away. And the higher cost of TCE is not going to be the easement itself, but the admin cost of that it can be up to 10,000 or even more per parcel. So here are some of the main issues that I have seen so far with cost estimates in our region. The first one is the PE and the CEI, the construction inspection percentages. when they're used on a 75% set of plants. Another problem that I see or issue is right away, again, admin costs completely being left out, or jurisdiction that have no idea what are their costs for the jurisdiction. And then they're asking me, so what is Charlotte's? And I say, well, Charlotte is Charlotte. You need to work and find out what is yours in your jurisdiction. Another one, private utility relocations. And going to the point that some jurisdictions, they don't know what the policies are in your own town. So as an example, Duke Energy and the city of Charlotte, they have an agreement, it's a 60-40, which means regardless of where the utilities are, anything with Duke Energy related in relocation, city of Charlotte pays 60% and Duke Energy takes the remaining 40% of that cost. That's not the same with other private utilities. Rounding. I've seen this, and I'll go over this once I start going over the form 1, but rounding multiple times. You start on one form with $990, and at the bottom of that same document or sheet, you go from $990 to $1,000, and then on the next document you use $1,100, and then later on $1,200, and eventually when you get to form 1, or previously called attachment 1A or 1B, then you're using $1,250. Well, if everybody's doing this redundancy of rounding over and over, and this is not a hypothetical example, this actually happened. If you get 10 projects that on average, they have a rounding error of $200,000 each, that adds up to $2 million. And we actually had this situation last year. So we also need to work on preventing this rounding over and over. And last but not least, again, the lack of documentation. So just having no assumptions. What is your assumption on this? What is your assumption for that? And the answer, I don't know. So next, I'm gonna go over form 1 and some of the examples. Did I need to zoom a little bit closer? Or is this good?
That's good.
Thank you. The first thing I want to mention is on the very first section to highlight, I know that we have projects that will be new because they're not in the category for CRTPO projects, but I still want to make sure that we capture projects that have a TIP ID number. So it's only for those projects that are absolutely new without a TIP number that you will be entering or just typing new. And so the same for your name when you're naming this file, as the example on node number 2. Obviously, project name, you have a menu for your base. And I want to make sure that this is consistent, or we want to make sure this is consistent, meaning the application, the Google form, your documents, that includes plan and supporting documents, they all need to match. So if your documents, your application and drawings, they say you are 50% design, you shouldn't be selecting right away, or you shouldn't be selecting anything but design. Now, we understand and we know there are going to be some exceptions because there is always an outlier or something similar to that. We can work that on a one-on-one or case-by-case basis. But in general, please make sure that all of your documentation is all the same. And then we don't have to go back and forth on questions on why this one is, and then another document is showing something else and so on. Please make sure that you're following the instructions, because even back in the spring when we first started Form 1, again from previously attachment 1A or 1B, we had a lot of people who didn't follow the instructions that I'm highlighting right now. So please make sure you follow those instructions. Something as simple as number 8, rounding to the nearest 1,000. And then again, that rounding back to the slide that I ended, people going from your supporting documentation showing 990, but in here, $990,000 in your documentation, and then you plug in $1 million. So in that case of 999, 990 is just fine. Again, let's keep that rounding over abusing of the rounding. Make sure that you are entering an anticipated fiscal year. It's okay to at least guess. If you need to have an idea of when you think each of these phases are going to occur in the project. Last year, again, we have many projects who didn't submit FY, and we had to go back and ask you and call you or reach out to you, and we need those dates. When we submit this to the POC and ultimately through the board, CRTPO board, they need to have a date. They won't go in without a date or a fiscal year.
Can we remind people, please, that the 8.1 grant discretionary funds will start to be programmed in FY25, if not later? So that's a little caveat there. So the PE would start maybe FY25, and then a couple years for right away and maybe a couple years for construction. I don't know the project, but that's just an example.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Good reminder. So I don't know if really we want to spend too much time entering information here. I can really just switch over the examples that we have already. So I'd rather to do that, but before I do it, are there any questions? I know that Lori or Lara, this is where you have a question in regards to the previous application?
Yes, for one of the values that we're going to put in there.
Okay, then go ahead. What exactly is the question?
So for the previous estimate, the contingency was on the total. Did you need me to break it up between partial on right of way, part of it on construction, or does it matter where I put it?
So if I understand your question, you're asking to how populate this column?
Yes.
Column C. Okay, and I think that's a really good question. So before I answer that question, I want to make sure, because we internally, the staff, in coordination with some folks in NCDOT, we ask this question. And first and foremost, we want consistency. By saying that means if you are using the previous estimates of cost dollar figures from, let's say, last November, and you knew it's from this month or last month, as far as the previous estimate, we're asking you to be consistent, and then you're not switching back and forth. In PE, right away, in construction, all of those phases, you are using the same values from the same time frame. So you're not going with PE from November of last year, but right away cost from 2 years ago. If you choose to go with the values from 2018 because you feel that's the value that really qualifies here as your previous, then it needs to be consistent, and you're using all of those values from 2018 or that year. So I think to answer your question is you wanted to use some of the information from attachment 1A from the fall of 2019. And what I told you before was don't use those. That, and even this form right now, this is where you enter your homework. This is what like taking an exam, this is your grading sheet. This is not where you're doing your homework. So by you entering the information or submitting attachment 1A from 2019 as your supporting documentation, that's not going to be enough. And in fact, most likely will be wrong. So previous estimate plus contingency, you don't have to break those. But again, if you go with your previous estimate from 2018 or January of 2019 or any other point in time that you have an official cost estimate, then make sure it's the same time years and make sure for that phase you have the actual cost and that contingency combined in that cell for column C.
Got it.
That's not the same now. For your new and latest estimate, to produce the new estimate without any contingencies in column D.
Got it.
So
Yes.
as an example, we go with $5,000. Let's say that was before, and now it's only $4,500. But in reality, depending on the phase, right? Let's say you're in planning. The file is going to calculate the contingency for you automatically.
Right. That makes sense. I'm following now.
Okay. Now there is another thing to keep in mind. And again, let me switch over the samples. Depending on your phase, then you have to enter the same from previous estimate in the new estimate. So once you pass or you are in PE phase, then that number, you're no longer, like right here, that would be a good example. You're no longer eligible to request shortfall or additional funding for that phase. If you're already in that phase or you pass that phase. And the reason, it can be an argument that somebody might say, well, by the time we go through this process and that funding is actually available for you, it's going to be a year from now. So even if you are in that phase, let's take this right here on the screen as an example. The likelihood that you're going to be able to utilize any of that funding is close to none. Unless you just barely started that phase, then I will say that would probably be one of those cases that I said earlier where we might have to do an exception. But most likely, those phases will be not applicable for that project. Another thing to consider, to keep in mind, is that you can only apply for a phase as long as that phase, you are eligible for that phase. So what that means is not every single project you are eligible to PE right-of-way construction. In fact, I've seen many projects that they're only eligible for construction. There are many projects that are not eligible for all three phases, which I think is the case with Lara in Huntersville. That project is not eligible for PE.
Correct.
So if that's the case, you have to enter 0, because otherwise you total, okay? But then if you actually add the value for that phase, let's say PE, your PE is 0, but you add the 625,000 as shown right now, then that's going to increase your total project cost, which is going to have an impact on your score. So you need to really keep it the way you have it right now in the books. Are there any questions with that statement that I made?
Okay.
So I have one for each of the phases. So the first phase, planning. So this is probably the most straightforward of the cases. A project that is in planning, entering your fiscal years. Again, it's an estimation or an anticipated year. And then enter the values from previous, which we can work on a case by case on what that previous estimate is, but again, it has to contain contingencies. I mean, we could have broken this in 2 columns and make you enter the previous raw estimate and the previous contingencies, but we decided to make it a little bit simpler and having you to add those numbers together. Again, the documentation that you will be providing will show or will verify that this information is indeed correct, both in time frame and both in the totals. Then you enter only the new estimate, no contingencies. It calculates for you and it tells you what the shortfall for that phase. And then the last item, maximum policies, so the VA and BA, and those are the numbers. So in this example right here, this project will not be able to request funding for DA since it exceeds that 25% rule. Here is another example that is in design. So on this one, regardless of how much your PE is, because you're already in design, previous and new will have to be the same. Again, the $625,000 of the value that you enter is subject to the fact that you are allocated funding for that phase. And the same may be for a right-of-way. So if your right-of-way is zero because you're not eligible for that phase, then you enter zero for before and after. So for previous and new. I think that's a note on that regards. So right-of-way, an example for right-of-way. Construction, most likely this means you're getting ready to start the construction phase. You probably either have a lead or a bed number, or you're waiting to go to that, but ultimately you are done with the right-of-way phase or getting ready to finish, really close to be done with your right-of-way phase. And so for the Federal Highway Administration guidelines, they don't allow, and I'm not quite sure about NCDOT in their projects, but they don't allow for contingency. So the contingency at that point has to be zero. But on top of that, when you are getting ready to get a lead or a bed coming in for a project, you should have a pretty clean, again, back to that diagram of the cone of uncertainty, you should have a pretty clear idea of how much money is this project. So for us to add on top of that contingency, that's the second reason, besides it's not for the guidelines and policy for a Federal Highway Administration, that number is zero. The other fact is that you should have a pretty clear understanding and knowledge of how much the cost is at that point in time. We're coming in, they knew they needed $700,000 or so, but then on top of that, they were getting 30 or 25% for contingency, which again they most likely won't be able to utilize in first place. And I see that we have a couple of questions. Let me get to the last example and then we address those questions. And this is the last example for Form 1, and then I'll open it for a couple of questions before I continue. When this is a new project. So again, it will be treated as a new project for all purposes, even if it's a new project with the tip ID. So new project, brand new project without the tip ID, enter new. And then this is the only case where you are allowed to enter a different local match percent, which it goes in intervals of 5%. It starts at 20 all the way up to 50%. So make sure that, again, you're following the application process and it will show. In the past, I think you can come up with a odd number, 22.5%, 33%. So some of the questions, I see a couple of comments and a question from Suzanne. Suzanne Morales. Given that you are developing estimates for 5+ years into the future, are you asking them to estimate a future year cost? And if so, what % inflation rate should be used? Oh, thank you, Suzanne. The answer to that question, and we also have this already coordinated internally and with NCDOT, we are not going to be including inflation rate at this time. Essentially, that's what really contingency should be covering. I know it doesn't seem that way, especially in a project that might be 5, 6, 7 years from now. But really, it goes down to what the policy, our policies are. And we right now, we don't address that situation. That would have to be a conversation as far as what do we do So at this time, and the recommendation would be that we go with the current year unit cost or cost estimate for year 2020. Now, if your project goes down 5 years from now and you indeed have an inflation and the project costs 20% more, then that's the case when you're going to have to come back for additional funding. And that's, again, that's something that the POC will have to address in an issue before, because most of the projects coming through for discretionary funding, the turnaround is relatively quickly. It's not something that we have to wait that long into the future.
Augustine, this is Neil. I have something to add to that. So basically, if it's a new project, some jurisdiction applying for new funding, it's going to have the greatest amount of contingency most likely because it probably has not completed design or right-of-way acquisition. So it might have as high as a 40% contingency rate. Now, if it's one of our existing discretionarily funded projects, and those projects may be able to be advanced earlier than FY25 if we can work with NCDOT on cash flowing those. And as a result, once you have PE and right-of-way completed, your contingency does diminish a little bit.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, next I have, how am I doing with time? Next I have some documents, or better, I want to call it tools. And the first tool, I don't want to go, I won't be going on the details of this, but this is some tools that we're going to be providing. We can send it via email, but also we're going to add on the website in the CRTPO next to the documents for the application and examples. The first of those documents is this Excel file that we call in the CRTPO cost estimating tool. So this is a document that we created with the help of City of Charlotte. And what it has in here is the line items for each of the phases. Be available on the website for you to take a look. But basically, what we have in here on the screen right now is each of those activities within the phase. And the reason we wanted to put this together is because time after time, we have so many jurisdictions, and this goes back to the methodology, where some people have no idea what exactly falls under what phase. So let's just take utility relocations, and it's always a back and forth, or to the point that they don't even think of that as an expense. Take the case of geotechnical expenses or testing, where you might have a project that, yes, might be $10,000, but again, on another project, you might have $100,000 due to the conditions and those unknowns on expenses for geotechnical and engineering services for that category. And a lot of times, most jurisdictions don't even know they qualify for that, or that's part of your agreement. So these line items that are on black text underneath the phases are pretty much everything. For the most part, I hope that everybody knows that's something that applicable in activity under that phase. The other items are a little bit more complicated to say because they really need to be within your agreement. If they're not in your documentation and that municipal agreement or paperwork, let's take land surveying, for instance, then most likely you're not able to request reimbursement for that. And even project administration and local staff time. A lot of times you have to submit the time rates for those for that personnel to be able to get reimbursement. So this Excel file has multiple tabs. The other one is a right-of-way calculator. And I think this one is probably the most complicated of the tabs. But I would say that there are so many instances where a cost estimate for the total project cost gets submitted, and there's really, again, no assumptions. There's very little information. There's really no documentation or anything on how they estimated the right of way, the cost for right of way. So hopefully this is going to be a tool for all of you to use. If you already have a methodology or a way in that you are capturing that data, that information, then great, use it. We are providing this again as a tool, an option to you all, so that if you have nothing else, please take a look, see how this can help you to improve your process. And right here, that has the links where you can get tax data. So here is an example. Again, this will be available for you on the website. For Statesville, Idaho County. One thing that I highlighted in here in these examples is how you want to make sure that when you're entering or you're using information for right-of-way costs, you're not estimating out of the total tax value. That's another thing that I see many times. And as you can see, a parcel can be significantly higher than the land value. And for right-of-way acquisition, unless you're buying the entire parcel, or for better term, you're having to do something with the structure, you're not paying the total land value, the total tax value, you're paying the land value. So in this example, there is a delta of a factor of 2, where the land value is $4.26 as opposed to $9.48 for the tax value as a whole. Here's another example in Mecklenburg County, using one of their websites available for Mecklenburg County. Here is a delta of 3 times, with the land value less than $10, but the total tax value at $27. In one example, for the residents in Monroe, Union County, where the land value 42 cents as opposed to $1.06. So 2.5, a factor of 2.5. So again, that will be information that's going to be critical, super critical, to get any kind of cost estimate, educated guess for right away. You need to know how many parcels you're impacting. If you have 100 parcels on a project, but you impact only 10 of them, that's the number you want to enter in here. You don't want to enter 100. You want to enter the number of parcels that you are affecting or potentially affecting. Now, this topic can be extremely complicated and time-consuming. So it's best that you always reach out to your tax office, and they can help you. I know City of Charlotte, for instance, they have people that has the software and the ability that if you tell them, they have some sort of GIS data where they can essentially copy and paste all of those tax values, as opposed to manually having somebody going and calculating those for you. So find out who in your town handles this type of information, or county. Most likely it will be the county rather than a town. But that's something that is up to you in your jurisdiction. You have to find those resources in your own county. Again, this is at least some of the information that I was able to find for you. So that should help you big time for right away, which again was one of those items that often we have very little to no information, and then throughout the entire project is kept as an unknown, even way into a well-designed project, a 75 or further level. Utilities, again, private utilities, because city-owned utilities is a little bit different. All of these unit prices in red, they are from the city of Charlotte. So you need to be working with the construction inspectors and people in your counties or towns to find the data in the unit prices for your town. So this one is more straightforward. You come in here, you can drive to the site or use Google Street View and just take a look and see how many poles, how many boxes you have to relocate. Worst case, count every box and you assume that and this is what it goes in your assumptions. You're assuming that you're having to relocate every single pole for this project from here to here. That's better than no information or just having a random number. And the last tab is a tool for the signals, which is another section where often it's just completely left out of a project without any data, any cost, any information whatsoever, or a random number, $500,000. And we're hoping that it's gonna work. So please use this, reach out to me if you have any questions on this tool, but again, it's gonna be available. You can rely on it, great. If not, still take a look and see how this can help you in improving the process and your methodology for how you're capturing your cost estimate. If you have a consultant, please feel free to share this with them and ask them, hey, take a look and let me know if you see some value in this tool. So back to the additional tools and resources. The very last one that I have is for construction. So that, for what I've seen, we all do pretty good with the construction cost. So I don't think we really need to dig into that today or in the future, because your consultants and the professionals in each jurisdiction, they really have a good handle on that. It's everything else outside construction that I see a huge need for improvements. Yet, I want to provide this as a guideline, nothing else but a guideline. This is the City of Charlotte bid results for the last fiscal year. And I have some notes at the bottom. So all the way from July of last year until June of this year. And I have about 25 line items. And these line items are the most common line items for the projects that we handle. So roadway, intersection, bike and ped, and transit related projects. Obviously, we have more than 800 line items in construction, but in many cases, I want to show this because a lot of jurisdictions, or in some cases, some jurisdictions, they go and very genetically, they use the same unit cost time after time. And what I really want to point out, just by highlighting sidewalk, for instance, maybe sidewalk is not a good example, but let's go with asphalt. How, depending on the quantity or the amount for that line item, the unit price is going to vary significantly. So again, sidewalk is not, maybe it's not a good example, but let's look at asphalt for a minute. And what we say is that the information that we have in here is the 25 percentile, the 50 percentile, and the 75 percentile out of a sample of 35 different projects. And again, this is the bid results. This is not what it was estimated, but the actual cost that came in from a contractor. Now, the $68 could be a project where you have high quantity. So if this is when the engineering judgment really comes in handy. Because if you have a project where you have, I don't know, 10,000 tons of asphalt, your individual unit cost is going to be very small. If in another project, you only have 100 tons, then you might be paying, and I'm sure that if you go and you look through some contracts with contractors, you will see that. So it is not a science, it is almost an art, but this should be a tool. Like once again, I'm not asking you, and I hope that no one is just using these numbers and go with these numbers. This is just to give you a little bit of direction, particularly for items that a lot of times we just plug a number like in walls, and I see $5,000, and you might have 2 of those. Well, that's fine, but if you have 10 of those, then you are increasing significantly your cost for construction. So once again, take a look. This information will be available for you on the website, and I'll be more than happy to go over any additional details on an individual basis for some of these tools and resources that I presented. I want to switch over to the presentation. Did you all see the presentation? So in conclusion, and we're getting ready to go to questions and answers, you need to create a methodology. If you already have a methodology, so we are giving you some tools and resources to improve that. Please take a look. Make sure that going forward, you're documenting those assumptions. On the first tab of that CRTPO cost estimating tool, you have a section for that in particular, but please make sure that you're doing it regardless. Don't rely so heavily on contingencies, or meaning don't try to take contingencies for those items that you still say, I don't know what the cost is going to be. You may not know what the cost is until you pay for it, but you can at least anticipate that they're going to be in your project, or eliminate those as an unknown. The rounding, I need to stop all projects. I didn't cover this before, but what that means is stop relying on, this is how I've been doing it for the last 10 years, for the past 5 years. There is a chance here where we can start doing things better than what we've been doing it again for previously. Use the tools that I provided, ask for help, coordinate with other people. You know, if your jurisdiction or county has real estate individuals, get with them, find out how much on average is the admin cost. Regardless of how much you pay, you can figure that admin cost. That again, Charlotte uses 10,000, as you can see on the Excel file on average. And don't wait until the last minute to ask for help. We're here, CRTPO folks, NCDOT folks, so you have people that can help you, most certainly, but don't wait until the last minute. And I want to close my section with a personal anecdote, which is some years ago, my mom came to me and asked me, say, mijito, I need your help. I need you to help me this cost estimate. And I told her, Mom, I don't have time. Well, she punched me in the face. No, I'm kidding, she didn't. But she told me, well, then you make time. And I'm saying that because really, it is true that you have to put the time to do a good cost estimate. I hope that no one is spending 5 minutes or 20 minutes to put together a cost estimate, because if that's the case, then I don't know. I certainly, like, how good is that cost estimate? You probably spend more than 5 or even 1 hour, 5 minutes or 1 hour, if you have to write a good report or a good letter to somebody important. So why not spending the time and putting the energy, the necessary energy and time on something that is going to have such a huge impact? In this case, you're talking about potentially millions of dollars. So make sure that you're spending the time. Otherwise, it's going to get ugly. I'm going to tell my mom. Now, with that, again, I want to thank you all for participating. If there are any questions, anything, we can go back some slides, go back to some of those tools, and answer any of those questions.
Are there any questions for Augustine? Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank Augustine and Jennifer and Curtis for putting together an informative webinar. I think every year that we go through this process, we get better at it. Certainly happy to have Augustine and his skills as a cost estimator and an engineer on our staff. It's just something we haven't quite had before, so it'll really help us improve the accuracy of those cost estimates. But if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and adjourn. And I just want to, before I do that, let you all know that there is another webinar that we have scheduled for October 7th. It'll be more of a general Q&A. And then the fall call for projects does end on October 16th, I believe. So don't wait till the last minute to fill out your applications, and feel free to contact any one of us should you have questions along the way. So if there aren't any further questions, we'll go ahead and adjourn for this afternoon, and just want to thank everybody for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.